We will now continue with our first panel debate, which is moderated by Ms. Amanda Löfkvist, who is the Deputy Secretary General of SILC and who has also lived for some time in Russia and written a very interesting book about Russian opposition movements. This is Amanda. And taking part in the debate are as follows from right to left: Lilia Shibanova, Executive Director of GOLOS, Valery Borschyov, who is member of the Moscow-Helsinki group, Olga Bobrova, who is a journalist who works for the independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta, and Mr. Sascha Tamm, who works for Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung and Liberals Institute. The theme of our panel discussion will be human rights and new restrictive legislation. What should be the EU standpoint? The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here. It's going to be very interesting to hear the opinion of the panel. This morning, I think we got a very good background on the EU-Russian relationship. And now it will be very interesting to get the input from the people whom this new restrictive legislation is directly concerning. I think we will do it this way, that we will start with 1 hour discussion here in the panel, and then at about 2 o'clock I will let in questions from the floor, from the audience. So I will start by giving the word to Lilia Shibanova for a little introduction. As Anna-Lena said, Lilia Shibanova is the director of GOLOS, which is one of the organizations that has already been mentioned and that has direct experience of the implementation of those new laws and direct and personal experience of this. So please, the floor is yours.
Спасибо, дорогие коллеги. Я бы сказала, что этот закон действительно изначально писался под несколько наиболее активных правозащитных организаций, которые больше всего раздражали нашу власть. И смысл этого закона был, конечно, агрессивно-клеветнический. То есть человек, вернее, директор этой организации обязан по этому закону, получая иностранное финансирование и занимаясь политической деятельностью, вот это обе составляющие, как считали парламентарии, идти добровольно, вступать в реестр иностранных агентов. И на всех своих материалах, публикациях, на пресс-конференциях, где бы он ни выступал публично, обязательно должно быть опубликовано о том, что он иностранный агент. Надо понимать, что в российском понимании этого
must be.
Организация, которая получила иностранное финансирование, и еще раз повторяю, по мнению Минюста, занимается политической деятельностью.
When the law was adopted, we discussed about the vague wordings and about the fact that anything can be interpreted as a political activity, because in a political activity, the law understands the influence of public opinion in order to change the government's policy. As far as the concept of agent is concerned, that was not written in the law. What kind of relationships between the legal entities in order to be able to interpret it as agents. We were waiting for all kinds of explanations from the Department of Justice. We hope that the Department of Justice create some procedure. For example, I didn't voluntarily put myself into register because I don't think I'm an agent. What then? But the thing is that the Department of Justice didn't say anything about its intentions. It uploaded on the site the number of criteria of the agent, and any kind of consequences were not mentioned at all. But nevertheless, the Department of Justice, during the very long period of time, showed some reluctance as far as this law is concerned. There was some effect of stalling, and the parliament got annoyed, and obviously all kinds of articles in the mass media, and in the framework of this campaign, the president addressed the FSB and said one word: the law must work. And the law began to work. And using the example of GOLOS, I would like to show you how this law is going to work, or begin to work. So the association GOLOS didn't receive any kind of foreign funding during 7 years. It is association because it associates 7 multi-regional funds and a lot of regional organizations. And organization which is independently financed, and the association has always been, even without any kind of money, even without Russian money, because we know that we are on the front line, and the IRS can close our accounts at any given moment in time. So that's why we were kind of in peace as far as the association concerned. We were concerned, though, about the funds and about our regional organizations, but not the association of the central one. Funny enough, though, the first organization under pressure turned out to be association, because the Sakharov Prize, in the opinion of a Russian monitoring agency, was given to us. And it was not really any kind of a checkup or inspection. We received notification to our organization that we must come and retrieve the ready protocol, the ready minutes. I was in Astrakhan. I gave the power of attorney to our lawyers, and I was completely shocked that what is about. Association doesn't possess any kind of money to begin with. So we kind of surprised. We read the minutes that in our transit account there is the money, the Sakharov Prize, and that is the reason why we are considered internationally funded organization. And we wrote a letter a month ago that we don't want this money, we want to send it back and things like that, just to not to compromise the association. But the bank did not act upon our letter. But that's about the bank. It's a separate story. But about political activity was just a really unique thing, that another legal entity which belongs to the association, GOLOS, conducted 4 years ago a project concerning the electorate code, and a lot of materials were put there about my own presentations, things like that. And back then we received this minutes, and the first shock was that there was such an absurd that we are definitely going to win in court. So in court, I work in the practice of defending the human rights, and I know what kind of legal procedures are conducted concerning the elections, and I understood that this country is some kind of a corporation. I don't know what it is, because all objections of our lawyer that explained that we didn't receive the financial part of the Sakharov Prize because we declined this monetary part, that there's no agreement according to any kind of a code, any kind of a law, and the verbal agreements don't really mean anything, because we received the title, but we didn't receive any kind of fund. The money came to the transit account and left the transit account. It didn't come to our organization's account as far as the money is concerned. So we had the impression that the court, that the judge didn't listen to us at all. Then there was some political issues, some political questions, and my speeches on the TV and all kinds of things like that. And the attorney explained that I am the managing sort of director, and to have a statement, to make a statement on behalf of our organization, I need to have a power of attorney, because otherwise it's just my own opinion. And that was ignored completely, and the electoral code was conducted by a completely different organization under the European Commission, and they had an agreement between two legal entities. That was not noted at all as any kind of legal grounds. And so actually, not even in the framework of this law, because the law kind of assumes that there is some kind of international funding, and then you have to prove that that international funding was used in some kind of political activity. And here, you don't need anything to impose a 300,000 ruble fine and things like that. So the consequence of the situation was that we turned to the representative of the Department of Justice and said that now the court ruled that we voluntarily refrained from registering ourselves as the agency. But on which basis do we have to register? Because we don't have any money anymore in the accounts. The contractual relations, there is none with those who sent us the money. So based on what documents are we going to register ourselves in this registry? Or we kind of enter and exit the registry because the money came and went. So we were explained that the one who is in the register cannot exit the register. There's no such a procedure as the exit from the registry. So in this collision, we clearly understood that the law was intended for repression. It was not intended for a fight against some political organizations which somehow receives international funding. It was done for repressions. Why a non-commercial sector was covered by this repression? That's because this sector has been in the front line in terms of criticizing the government, which is pretty much forbidden. And this specific situation, we need to understand that when we spoke here about the fact that this power is going to exist for many years to come, and we have to work with Mr. Putin for a long time in the future, but he doesn't think so. My personal impression that they don't think so. This is the state of collapse of the power, the hysterical state, the state of history and fear. And I really want to ask him, is it so scary to live in Kremlin so that you use some really unlawful measures? So in this situation, we need to understand that this power is very shaky nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just have a follow-up question. So GOLOS will under no circumstances register as a foreign agent.
I cannot mislead the citizens. We don't carry out functions of any agency of any other country. How can I come and voluntarily say that I am somebody's agent? That would be a lie against myself.
Thank you very much. I'm now giving the word to Valery Borschyov, who is, as we said before, he's a member of the YABLOKO party board and also a member of the Moscow-Helsinki group. And maybe many of the Helsinki in 1975 principles are very relevant right now here. Please.
Для партии «Яблоко»
защита
прав человека чрезвычайно важна.
The fight for the human rights is extremely important, and this movement in Russia goes way back. You probably remember how in 1957 we had a manifest of Russell and Einstein. It was called New Thinking, saying that in existing circumstances the problems cannot be solved from the point of view of national, political and religious standpoints. Now we live in the times when the problems must be solved from the humanity point of view. And this manifest was the push for forming the human rights movements. And then in 1968 there was an article by Sascha about convergency of different cultural systems. And this human rights movement stipulated that human rights is not a national jurisdiction. It's an international jurisdiction. And the human rights issue cannot be limited by the national borders of one individual country. And when 40 years ago we adopted Helsinki Agreement, it was a huge victory. The Soviet Union signed the declaration and the third basket of human rights. And I'm now reminding you because, unfortunately, in Europe we are now forgetting that victory, and that was a very serious victory, because I'm a member of Moscow Helsinki group, and our group was created then, and that is a very important thing. And when I was an MP, among all kinds of laws to overcome the totalitarianism, the dictatorship, the most important problem was the non-transparency of power structures, jails, psychiatric hospitals, FSB, and so forth. And I created a draft law on control of human rights by the English model, which is, in essence, is that the representatives of an NGO, two people, select their representatives, and they are being confirmed by the parliament, and thereby we form a commission that by notification can at any time of day or night come to a prison cell, speak with an inmate, and check how the human rights are being obeyed. That was an extremely important victory, a very important law. Against that law there are all kinds of movements, and so far it's been enforced though. Thanks to this law, we have been able to conduct an independent investigation of the death of Mr. Magnitsky. On the following day, we came to Butyrka prison and conducted a survey among the guards, doctors, took a look at the documents. We were there before the prosecutor's office, and people told us a lot of interesting things without the government's control, and we affirmed in our opinion that he was subject to violence. I'm not even saying about those cells that he was held. They were equivalent to torture. But after our investigation, those cells were reconstructed. They were demolished. I observed the reconstruction of those cells, so the reaction was kind of appropriate. But everything that belongs to documentation, there was a powerful lie, like, for example, that Magnitsky didn't complain. That's absurd. I said that a general is sitting next to me. There is a copy of Magnitsky's complaint. This is the reply of the general. Why don't you see this this journal, this registered journal? And the journal is written by one handwriting, so clear falsification. And I know also that for months and a half this journal was not held, was not maintained, because the prosecutor's office, the first thing that they ask is the journal. So a lot of lies. But that's Butyrka. In Butyrka we took a look at the video where Magnitsky 2 hours before the death lifts two huge bags, goes to the car, so to assume that he's going to be dead in 2 hours, there's no reason to assume anything like that. So we went to the other place where there was no video at all. The video was it had disappeared, and we had the hypothesis that he was beat up even before the arrival to the second prison. We spoke with the doctor. that made a decision to give him to 8 guards, and then the basis of that decision was that what are you doing with my papers? And indeed, there was like 400 pages of papers, and he was trying to cover himself with a plastic bag and saying that they're going to kill me. And an hour later, he was dead. And in the forensic photographs, there were all kinds of traces of violence in his body. That he was swinging the bed in the cell. Well, first of all, this bed is not liftable by anybody, and the cell is 1.5 meters in width, so you can actually swing anything in there. And I'm not even talking about the decree of the Department of Justice, according to which all the furniture is screwed to the floor in all European prisons, by the way. And that was a really sincere lie, you know. And she called 8 guards, but before that, she called a psychiatric ambulance because he was diagnosed with the acute psychosis. Those psychiatrists were not led into the hospital for about an hour. They were led into the hospital when he was already dead, when he sat on the floor, and the handcuffs were next to him, and the paramedics. And the paramedics, actually, by the way, it's a very closed structure. It was very difficult to get in. And when I needed the confirmation of those doctors, I was not led to the doctors because it was forbidden. So leave your phone number. Maybe the doctor is going to call you. Indeed, the doctor called me, and because the doctor turned out to be so conscious person that he said that for about an hour we had to wait. We came in. We diagnosed the death of Magnitsky because in all official documents he was placed to the emergency room, and all kinds of lies. So we prepared an investigation report, and we found a document. We found a document of the chief investigator of the police that, according to the law, when somebody dies, he must stipulate the death of somebody. So this policeman, on the 19th of November, wrote a report that he came and saw the dead body of Magnitsky, and wrote a report that according to his suspicion, a murder took place according to the Article 105, and I want to register the fact of crime. We have a copy of this document. There are all kinds of signatures and things like that. The investigation of that document was not discovered. That's very serious. And further on, there was a very strange situation. Well, we sent a letter, a report to the president, to the general prosecutor, and so forth. Silence, absolutely no reply. And we asked the deputy general prosecutor, and we were called to the general prosecutor's office, to the investigative committee. We were heard, and the situation started to move towards the investigation. Marina Lomonosova was there, and we saw that they actually tried to do something. And at the meeting of Presidential Council, I asked the representative of the investigative committee, why are you trying to start from the secondary persons? And he said that, don't worry, this is just the beginning. That was in April last year. So everything was kind of speaking for the possibility. About the money, they were kind of very firm. Our colleagues, there was very firm. But as far as the death, there was some kind of movement. So we had some kind of a hope that something might happen. Then in summer there was a trial against the doctor of Butyrka. I was heard there, as a witness for an hour, and after that the doctor was speaking up to me. She was committing perjury and she was lying. So somebody was lying, and I said to the judge that one of us must be brought to justice for perjury, but somehow it was damned. And we had a hope that our investigative committee is conducting investigation. I can tell you, but without our investigation, and we uploaded it to our website, somebody translated it into English, the browser read the English version and things like that. So without that commission, without this investigation, the death of Magnitsky would have remained a mystery. But we had some kind of a hope. Then all of a sudden it was stopped cold turkey, all kinds of contacts with the investigative committee. And the 5th of March I turned to the chief of the investigative committee, said that we used to have some kind of an interaction, we were invited to the meetings, and why did you stop it? The president said that we need to continue and we have to renew our cooperation. And he said that I will try to instruct my colleagues. And I waited for the phone call, and 5 days later the announcement came that the case is closed, there was no crime at all. This is a very scary fact. It's one thing that, some suspicion or mistrust, but when there is a clear, serious documents about the death, about injuries, about traces of violence, we have testimonies of policemen, doctors, all kinds of people. There was a report of the working group of Presidential Council. And before giving some kind of a statement, the President probably took a look at the report. And the report was written by very, very high-profile people. And all of a sudden, unexpectedly, we had a decision to close the case, which is a terrible contradiction, which means that any case, any death, any murder that the authorities need to close is going to be closed and not investigated. So I believe that this is unacceptable. We are not going to accept it. We are thinking about what to do. Not very many possibilities. The forecasts are rather sad, but I would like to say, though, that this is not about Russia only. This is a precedent which goes beyond the border of the country, and this is why I started with the Russell and Einstein manifest. This is not a question of Russia, of national sovereignty. It's a question of human rights which pertains to at least all Europe and, of course, America for that matter. So, dear colleagues, I would like you to take it very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, what is your opinion? What should be the EU standpoint in the Magnitsky? Christina Oyland raised the issue earlier today. What do you think? What can the EU do? What can the EU say or do in relation to this?
The standpoint can be different. Back in 1970, we used to sing that we are going to remember by name everybody who raised their hands. We spoke about Boris Pasternak, but that was not true. We didn't remember by name everybody who raised their hands, and those criminals that killed the great poets remained unpunished. But I need to note that in the beginning of the 90s, when Europe began to investigate the issue of criminal psychiatry in Russia, our doctors became desperate, and the Minister of Healthcare was our best, greatest friend. And those people reacted, and they react in different forms. But the names of the people are not known. They must be known. They must be known for international community, for some professional community. But those people who committed the crime, and I insist that they did commit the crime, must be put into some lists, and in any event, our international colleagues shouldn't give them any hand.
Olga Bobrova, who is a journalist. That microphone is supposed to work. Just tell them what number it says. It's number... What number? What number does it have? Первый. He just needs to know which number. Yes. He turns them on off, but he needs to know which number. So we mixed them up. That's where there was a problem earlier. So, Olga Bobrova, who is a journalist at Novaya Gazeta, a member of the editorial board, and who has been writing about civil rights and liberties, and also about the situation in the North Caucasus. Please.
Я буквально несколько слов скажу о том, как
Say just a couple of words about all the changes in the Russian legislation touched the press. We spoke about all kinds of laws which are really confusing, and the press is very concerned about the return of defamation to the criminal code and the law about the foreign agents as far as the NGOs are concerned. All kinds of little things to explain that, and a lot of things is going to happen too. The very large subject of discussion is about state secret, and our Western colleagues are very concerned the law about prohibition of promotion of homosexualism among minors, and it's very interesting how we're going to work with the law about religious feelings, a very, very vague law, and a very curious law. The last one that was adopted is about use of obscene words or language in press. A lot of laws that are going to be adopted assume quite large, quite substantial fines, and we need to understand that this way they create a financial hook by which regional media are going to be brought to some kind of justice, because we understand that financial issue for a lot of Russian media that are trying to be independent in their coverage is a very important issue. So this is the way to control them. But in addition to that, these small and sometimes very vague and confusing and absurd laws, they are following another objective. They create an additional agenda. And by discussing the idea on how we are going to not insult the religious people, or we don't know actually how we're going to insult them, as far as the promotion of homosexualism is concerned, the definition of promotion is not prescribed. So we go away from the actual problems. I understand why the government does it, because they do it so that the Duma creates the impression that they are workable, viable, that they adopt laws which are, from the point of view of people in the regions, are very important, because don't they have any more substantial problem than obscene language? Because is it so that all the newspapers promote homosexualism? It's completely absurd. But the saddest thing is that the power structures in Europe, they actually achieve quite an interesting success, because a lot of international colleagues ask us, just according to these laws, how are we going to work in these new conditions? And this is the way to go away from the actual problems of Russian press. We spoke a lot about how NGOs are going to live in the situation of this foreign agent law. Where is the $1 billion that came or didn't come? Or in the professional community, neither in the events like today, we don't discuss such a problem as that the absolute majority of regional media live under the conditions of informational agreement. So it works so that a large commercial structure enters an agreement with the media, with the newspaper, which is essentially the agreement of non-aggression, the non-aggression agreement, non-aggression pact. And so we understand in what kind of reality the people live in the regions, what kind of idea about the reality they can create. I'm not criticizing our colleagues in the regions, because it's a question of survival, not even financially, although that is quite substantial, because you can lose your lease and encounter problems with discrimination, distribution of the newspaper, because we know that during the last 20 years in Russia, about 300 journalists were killed, and a very small number of those crimes were thoroughly investigated. I worked in this Novaya Gazeta for 10 years, and in my time, 5 journalists have been killed. Only 2 murders were thoroughly investigated, and there is no hope that other murders are going to be investigated to the end. And now about what the European Union could do to help us in this situation and to support us somehow. I apologize for too strong opinion. Maybe it's a very naive opinion to someone, but human rights must stop being a commodity, because human rights should not be on one side of the scale, or on the other side of the scale there is oil, gas, Russian market, investment, outsourcing. Human life, human rights, at the end of the day, is a thing of completely different scale, a completely different order of magnitude. You cannot compare round and hot. They're completely incomparable things. And the second thing, the second paragraph of the program, for those who is done with the first one, I even use the specific example. I work in the Caucasus, and many embassies in Moscow, people who are responsible for Caucasus, they consult with the specialists because they don't have any possibility to travel a lot, because some of them do, some of them don't. And they meet in order to, to discuss the situation, a couple of words about what's going on there in Caucasus. So some time ago there were talks about the Magnitsky law and all kinds of other things. So one of the persons from the embassy said that we probably have to terminate the relationship. I have to tell you that I'm not telling you that the law is not adopted yet. We are not scared yet. We don't understand how to act in this situation. And our, I would say, partners have put the reverse on. So this is a little bit of a treason, in my opinion. We have a very interesting organization in Russia. It's called Rights of Mothers, in support of families of soldiers and officers that were killed in action. They first of all promote the investigation, and secondly some kind of financial support from the government, because the government doesn't have any kind of intention, to support them financially. And this organization is a charity. It has nothing to do with foreign agents, but the organization that used to grant them to subsidize them denied the grant this year. There was no motivation that it's about the international agent law, but I think that those things are interconnected, and since we are talking about it anyway, this is not right. Either let's stop being hypocrites and say that these are the framework where we are ready to be friends, but otherwise let's continue to support each other, this kind of format. If we move to this direction, so we are going to improve each other's lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's on? Yes. Thank you very much, Olga, and thank you for the advice. And I would also like to ask you, Lilia already also mentioned this, and you also, why is this repressive legislation, why is it happening right now? And will it be successful, so to say, from, what do you think, why is it happening right now? Он включит. Надо держать.
Вот, все, я его включила. Ну, мне кажется, это прямое следствие.
I believe this is a direct consequence of what was going on in Russia. Last couple of years, 2011 and 12, those events, have shown that Russia can protest not only in the kitchen, and Russia is ready to protest openly, and the society which is ready to actively express its mistrust to the Russian government. The society is large and is growing. And this is a terrible thing for the government, and something must be done. And if it's impossible to control it, like technically, to put it into some frames, although we know what is going on in the Zabolotne Square, at least you can scare. In the regions, we scare people like that, and because those people are light years away from the European ideas about what is going to be elsewhere than in Moscow, in St. Petersburg. This is just a sense of fear.
I give the word to Sascha Tamm, who is representing the Friedrich-Naumann-Stiftung and the Liberal Institute in Potsdam, and who spent, I think, 2 or 3 years in Moscow. Yes, thank you.
Now? Yes. Okay. First, thank you for inviting me to Finland. It's only my second time in my life to be in Finland. One introductory remark. I have one thing in common with the Russian president. We are both former foreign agents. He worked as a foreign agent in Germany, in the same town where I've been studying at this time, in Dresden. And I'm, under new Russian legislation, worked as a foreign agent, to some extent, in Russia from 2009 till 2012, because I was head of the office of the Naumann Foundation, and we cooperated with YABLOKO party, with GOLOS, with many other organizations. But there's one big difference. Putin was a real secret agent, and everything what we did in Russia was very transparent and open. We cooperated in organizing events, in issuing publications and so on with our partners from the liberal family. And therefore, from my perspective, there's nothing wrong. And even from the Russian side, it is nothing to criticize in this. But I'm here to answer the question, what should the European Union do? I'm not an official. I'm a citizen of the European Union, and I'm very often critical also about decisions of the European Union. But I would like to start from very, very simple principles, and those are liberal principles. We are here as guests of the Liberal Party. I'm a member of the Liberal Party in Germany myself. And liberalism starts not from governments, does not start from bureaucracies, it starts from individuals. And that, from my perspective, should be the core of also our liberal relations or our foreign relations and our relations as societies towards Russia. We should not focus so much on the Kremlin. We should focus on Russians who should have the same rights like every one of us. That means, starting with some points we've discussed here, I'm completely in favor of easing the visa regulations. I'm for visa-free travel for all Russians. I'm against any privileges for Russian officials. And there might be some reason for excluding some officials, like in the Magnitsky case or in some other case. But I'm in favor of lifting all visa regulations for Russians. And I think if the European Union would do it, would open its borders. It would be a very, very difficult situation for the Kremlin to deal with. Because, as has been said earlier, they do not really want it. They do not want that their citizens have the freedom to travel. So, that all of their citizens have the complete freedom to travel. And I think all arguments against lifting visa regulations are wrong, because there's an argument about crime. You know, I've never heard of a big shot criminal who did not get a visa for the European Union and therefore stayed out of the European Union. I've never heard. And that means what we are doing as the European Union at the moment is to exclude many Russians from the opportunity to visit the European Union and to see what happens here, how it works, which problems we have, and so on. And I also made the experience that after coming back from Europe, from the EU Europe, the picture was much more positive than before from all Russians I've met. So that's the first thing. Second thing, in German or in European media and also among politicians.
Please,
okay, close.
Into the microphone,
okay,
like this.
Yeah, we often hear that there's a contradiction. On the one hand side, we have human rights issues, liberty issues, and so on, and there we can somehow protest. But on the other hand, there are economic interests, and therefore we should be more calm and so on. I think this contradiction simply does not exist. Because if we look at the real structure of trade between Russia and the European Union, you know, I will not go into details, but Russia delivers oil, gas, natural resources. That's more than 90%. And they depend on delivering to Europe natural resources. They depend. We also depend to some extent, but we have alternatives they do not have. That means even if our politicians, our European politicians or at the national level openly criticize human rights violations in Russia or other things, violations of property rights, the lack of rule of law and so on, nothing will happen. They will not close the pipelines. They will not stop delivering gas and so on. That's absurd from my perspective. And therefore, we can we can do both. Openly speak out against human rights violations and do trade. As a liberal, I'm a free trader. I like trade. I like free trade, and it's good for both sides. But it's not. We should not discuss it also the trade issue, not mostly on a governmental issue, on an EU and Russia issue, level, but we should discuss this also on the at the level of entrepreneurs, of companies, of individuals. And the EU should do everything to create incentives for more trade and to open its economic space for Russia. If Russia does not do so, it should not be an argument for Europeans to close its borders itself. From my perspective, it's useful even if we as Europeans do some things like lifting visa regulations only as one side, only that the European Union does so. And Russia will follow or not, but the problems then will be on the Russian side, on the Russian governmental side. That's my position, to open freedoms, to open opportunities for Russian individuals and Russian companies as much as possible, without too much regard to what the Kremlin does. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a few follow-up questions before we let the audience in. You mentioned the visas again, and I have a question to any of the Russian participants. What do you think would, if the EU would agree to this demand that Putin put up in the last minute to give visa freedom only in a first step to the people with blue passports, which are representatives of what Mr. Yavlinsky earlier called the corporation that rules Russia? How would that, if EU would lay down in that issue, how would that be perceived by the Russian civil society? How would that be perceived? What do you think?
Вы знаете, я хочу сказать, что ведь они ж не просто.
I would like to say that this is not just the demand, the visa-free demand for blue passports. Sergei, which is the head of administration, said the EU connects the visa issues with the human rights issues. They are annoyed, in principle, on a basic level, that this issue is connected to the human rights issue. This is the problem. So, of course, categorically, it's unacceptable. On the other hand, it is unacceptable to deny, to eradicate this connection between this issue and the human rights. These are very, very strongly related issues.
And then I have a follow-up question to you, actually, Sascha. Also, after Grigory Yavlinsky, he asked a question, понимает ли ЕС, с кем они имеют дело? When he mentioned, I'm not talking to you as representative of Germany, but as a person who lives in Germany, might have some insight. He mentioned this situation with Merkel not protesting against Putin's absurd accusations about $1 billion. Does the the EU know who they are dealing with?
Very good question. I think at least Merkel right now knows better whom she's dealing with than the administration which was in power before her. That's a positive thing I would say too. You know, everyone knows quotes that Putin is a perfect Democrat. Ein lupenreiner Democrat. It was the former Chancellor of Germany. You know, he was very good compensated for this comment later on. And yes, there is a tendency, there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of expertise, but there's still the tendency to, it's an old word in political science, appeasement, to say, we are not too offensive towards Russian administration. Yeah, okay. And I think there could be more critique. It's not a question from my perspective of knowledge or expertise. It's a question that they have not the right priorities and their fear is too big on economic issues that something could happen. There is, among many politicians all over the world, also a lack of expertise, for sure. But regarding Russia, from my perspective, that's not the major problem. They know who is criminal there and where these people are coming from and so on in the Kremlin. That's not a problem at the top level. But the problem is their attitude towards it. And they are too cautious from my perspective.
Is it maybe an issue of who the EU feel that they are addressing when they say something about the situation in Russia? They don't really, they address the people of Russia and the government at the same time, and there's a lack of strategy who are actually addressing?
Yeah, probably you're right. And they always are looking in the Russian administration for the good guy. That's also a problem. That was this Medvedev hype, I remember. It was strange from the beginning, yes. He is simply
Вы знаете, я просто хотел бы предложение дать. Вот я в ноябре был в Женеве на сессии комитета против torture.
I was in Geneva on the conference against torture, and Russia had a presentation, and there was a presentation of the Russian government, and the alternative presentation from the NGO. And I was the representative of the NGO about the torture issue. EU need the same kind of practice. So we listen to the point of view of the government, and then we listen to the point of view of an NGO. If UN does that, why couldn't EU do that?
Do you think the EU-Russian Civil Society Forum would be a good representative to fill this role?
Да, конечно, конечно. Нет, я хочу сказать, что вот в ООН это работает, потому что представители
UN, because the governmental representatives of Russia, they were in a very, very difficult position because there was a very difficult thing for them to lie. They did lie though, but they didn't feel comfortable lying because we spoke ourselves. The head of the Committee Against the Torture was speaking there. So this kind of format, so the NGOs and the government speak together. It's a very, very effective format.
Thank you very much. I will now let in the questions from the audience. I'll just, if there's any last comment before we let in the questions. No? I don't know if Anna-Lena wants to administer the questions or I can do it. Raise your hands very high. Who wants to ask a question? Yes. Please present yourself.
Hello, my name is Raimo Partanen, and I'm from Karelia Klubi in Finland. We have somewhat 2,000 members. But I'm mostly interested about the minority groups in Russia and the human rights. I've been told by a Russian person that the minority groups in Russia, which are smaller than 50,000 people, they are regarded in Russia as minority groups. But those minority groups which are over 50,000, they have not the same minority rights as these other groups. Altogether, it's been told that there are somewhat 150 ethnic groups in Russia, and they must have all different kinds of humanity problems there. Well, my question is that would it be possible to arrange an international meeting of humanity rights for the minority groups in Russia, especially here in Finland, like in this Hanasaari, to invite those minority groups in Russia to come here and to speak with the minority groups' problems with the European countries. I think we have also in Europe minority groups in various countries which have serious problems, especially in the Eastern Europe, and those must be taken up and spoken and tackled in a very good manner. This is my question.
Thank you very much. I think Valery Vasильевич would like to answer that question, I think.
Мне кажется, это очень хороший вопрос, очень актуально. Спасибо, что вы подняли.
Raising this question, and dear colleagues, I need to remind you all our own sin, our common sin. When Osmans came to Georgia, they didn't accept them, and in Krasnodar they were not accepted by the Russians, and this ethnic group of Osmans, of ethnic Turks, were so suffering that eventually they were accepted by Europe. But the serious investigation of that arbitrary behavior towards a people was not conducted. So your suggestion is very relevant, so that we don't repeat the same mistake, the same minority mistake.
The 66, I believe.
Yeah. But I just wanted to add to what the gentleman was saying, that with these questions, of course, you should turn to Den Haag, to The Hague, for the High Commissioner on National Minorities from the OSCE, which at the moment is also a Nordic citizen, Mr. Knut Vollebeck, and he focuses specifically on national minorities, also putting the emphasis on the fact, like Max van der Stoel, his predecessor, Dutch special envoy diplomat, made, that being a national minority is very many different things, but it's not just being a number. It's not just being a small group. It has many, many different sides to it. So you could say that basically, a priori, the fact of a Russian government using as a criterion just a number of a group would be not a way to assess this challenge or this problem. So being a national, what Max van der Stoel always said,
what is a national minority? He said, I know one when I see one, so I'm not counting.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Do we have any more questions? Yes, Martin, here. Are there any?
Yeah. Regardless of the European Union, can you tell me what's the feeling in civic organizing in Russia at the moment? Is the civil society and the people, the political activists, are they paralyzed by the challenges that have been raised? Or are they indeed fired up and ready to go and really, I mean, because we've seen demonstrations and then we've seen this repression as a response actually to the people getting more involved. But where are the people at the moment? What can we foresee in the next year? Thank you.
Я бы сказала, что на вопрос...
I would say that the question is quite complex because NGOs are not intended for political fights. Non-commercial organization, an NGO, is an organization for interaction with the power structures to solve social problems. So the role of NGO between the society and the government is not a political fight, not a political combat. As far as the political actors are concerned, of course we need to understand that the repressions, harsh repressions after the 6th of May last year, we just need to understand that there was a lot of people that spent in prison, basically in torture cells. It is frightening, I must say, and the civil activists don't necessarily attend meetings which are like allowed, but there are a lot of people who are ready to take a chance, but we need to understand that the risk is becoming really huge. And I want to add that you know that you are pushed up against the wall and you don't have anything to lose. Then you become really brave and you don't have any fear because you have nothing to lose. So what do? Because we belong to the Human Rights Council and under the guidance of Helsinki Group, we made a decision that we are not going to take the status of an international agent. It was a collective decision. It was an act of protest. At the same time, it was a consolidation. We have NGOs that conduct some judicial activity. The situation is difficult, I must say, but as far as the 6th of May is concerned, it's hard, but we created the Civil Commission, an investigative commission for the 6th of May. We sent a report to the General Prosecutor that there was no mass disturbances, that there were some provocators, and what comes out of it, we're going to have to see, to wait and see. But nevertheless, there is an activity which is not mass activity, that's true, but it is there. I'll let you with a couple of words about the format of this new civil consciousness, what people actually do. I must say that possibly nobody's going to come to the square in hundreds of thousands because the efficiency is not necessarily high enough and it's dangerous and, dicey and things like that. But nevertheless, I must say that I was an observer at the last parliamentary election and some other elections. In Vyshkovsky there was a local election, and I must say that there are two different planets. What I saw last year in the parliamentary election, although back then there was a lot of prepared people, so to say, which knew what they wanted to do, and what now was in Zhukovsky, when all the election points were filled with the observers, with members of electorate committee, and that were ready to cut any kind of trials of infringement. And the opponents try to change the strategy. They try to be trickier, to think about it. They encounter problems. They have to invent some alternatives, some alternative brigades of observers that are trying to sabotage the actual observers. So it makes their lives difficult. So slowly but steadily, we're going to get there.
Any other question? Yes?
How about the restrictions being made on the use of the internet? Are they affecting the organizations already, and in which outreach? And then with the media, do you feel like you have some kind of contact with the state-run media as well, or is it mainly the independent news?
I think that's two questions. Why don't Olga, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the internet restrictions, a little fact background. Yes.
Ну, собственно, нас как-то
напрямую-то еще пока не касается. Have not been touched, directly by these internet restrictions, but obviously they're going to come, so some laws that I mentioned, they are going to push the whole thing to that direction, like this defamation law or some prohibition of promotion of homosexualism among the minors, which is going to be worked upon. But I have to say that these are conditions that we've always lived. Talking about defamation, in spite of the legislation, except for a few months when Medvedev used to be president, it used to be in the criminal code. This is the reality that we had to probably accept or take into account, at least. So from this point of view, nothing has largely changed. This is just a new method of how to chase someone into a corner, So I cannot tell you that it has had an obvious impact on the Russian media, but it's a subject of discussion. It is going to have an impact if it turns out to be effective.
There's also a question about the interaction with the state media. I understand. Yes? Does anybody want to contact? Yeah.
Общение с государственными медиа.
Well, interaction. It's hard to answer this kind of a corporative question. Maybe you mean the NTV policy and their behavior in recent times when the colleagues behaved indecently, when during the inspections, the comprehensive inspection, there were NTV together with the prosecutor's office, together with the fire marshal, just to show the public what is going on with the NGOs, in the NGOs. It was not very polite. It's, maybe reprehensible, but still they have their own niche, and they do successfully do their job. This is their job, and this is their life choice, and God bless them, But this is the choice that they made, and to us it's quite obvious what kind of people they are. They could have been, if we speak about the television, about the Channel 1, they could do their work much more elegantly, and the product would have been not so grand, much more convincing, but it is like it is. And in this case, they do quite a bad favor to Russia. More questions, please.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, меня зовут Кари Каунисма, я бывший директор.
My name is Kari Kaunisma.
Well, I made my dissertation about history textbooks used in schools in Soviet times and in Russia. And now, like Mr. Tamm probably very well knows, in Germany they have been discussed very, very deeply about this past. But I assume that in Russia the situation is not the very same. Now President Putin is demanding one interpretation of history for everybody in Russia. And I'm strongly against it. It won't be necessary or useful in any distance. So what do you think about that? We just heard about one question about these limitations to this media, but I suppose that Russia hasn't limited the use of internet in the same way like China, for instance. But what do you think about this explanation, interpretation of history in schools?
I will give the word to Lilia.
Надо понимать, что политика пропаганды – это политика пропаганды.
Is the politics of propaganda when the power structures take a goal, set a goal to create an illusion of its efficiency, and this is the main platform to create a propaganda that any point of view is not heard. Instead, only the power structure's point of view is heard. So they go all the way down to this patriotic upbringing, so to create an illusion of history that explains the today's significance of this power structure. So this is a logical continuation of this propaganda politics that our government is exercising. Of course, this trend of going back to the Soviet doctrine of a powerful state, that everybody is an enemy that must be fought and things like that. So this organizes the electorate that is being bought and brainwashed by this political technology, which is a campaign of current government. In the framework of this political technology, we can follow the trend to clean up a little bit the history textbook, to look a little bit better in the history and in the reality of today. And you know, as experience has shown, any official point of view, and this is what Putin said about the official point of view, sooner or later is going to encounter a protest. I know it by school, by the university, and I know that the protest is going to take place. And thank God there is memorial, and every October to the Sovietsky stone, people come and read the names of the fallen. And my 10-year-old granddaughter listens to the lectures, and they don't ask two specific questions, but they become acquainted. And for example, Novaya Gazeta newspaper on a regular basis writes about memorials. So Mr. Putin is not going to have a very easy time to confirm this position, because this societal protest is going to take place.
Shocking, I think, in Russia is that very many people still, when they talk about Stalin, they would say that yes, he was a dictator, yes, he killed people, but he won the war, and then they kind of put that on a balance on each side. And that's a fact. He won the war. And what does that do? I mean, and isn't that something that Putin, he likes that way of thinking, because he can use that also as a way of this moral, what you can say, moral lack of moral imbalance, so to say. You can use it also for people to expect the policies of today.
Frankly, Putin is very sympathetic towards Stalin. He said in the last press conference that Stalinism is bad, but Stalin is a very interesting figure to him, and of course he is envious to his will of power, to his system of administration. He would like to do it in different space and time, but you know, about the popularity, I've lived a very long life, and I related to Stalin in very different ways, and we spoke quite openly that it was not Stalin who won the war, but the marshals Zhukov, Verkosovsky, and it's just a matter of how it is presented, how it's covered. As far as the need for a strong hand, it is there, because arbitrarity, corruption. People don't believe in democratic civil society. They have this psychology of a monarchy, that a monarch is going to come and clean the scene. You know, it is there, unfortunately. Also, since we since we accept some kind of rhetorics that he killed half the country and won the war, we must say that now there is no war, and this ace is not working anymore, and our Russian society understands perfectly that there is no such an excuse, to live for somebody, Еще у нас какой-то вопрос там?
Raimo Partanen again. Business relations rely on trust and interaction, or fair. I have read just lately that great majority of Western banks are coming out of Russia, stopping their offices in Russia. And I wonder if they have stopped trusting on the Russian government, or what is the reason that they are escaping from Russia, and what will happen to the Western companies who have been trusting on these Western banks in Russia. Can they trust on the Russian banks, or will they come also away?
We have only 5 minutes, so left actually our panel. I don't want to steal time from the next panel, so I will let you answer that question shortly, and then I will ask my final question, and then there is time to ask personal questions during the coffee breaks.
First, I would not trust any bank, neither in the European Union nor in Russia at the moment. But when we discuss trust in Russia, one thing is very interesting. There's still a lot of foreign investment. For example, from mid-sized entrepreneurs from Germany or other European countries. We have 6,000 German companies registered by our Chamber of Commerce in Moscow. But the interesting thing is many foreigners bring money into Russia still, but Russians bring their money out of their country. That's very interesting to observe. Sometimes I had also the feeling when I discussed with Russian entrepreneurs when I lived in Moscow, or with German ones, that the Germans trust the Russian economy more than the Russians. And the question is quite open, who knows more about the Russian economy? The Russians or the Germans, or the Russian state of property rights? I would be very skeptical. As was said this morning, property rights in Russia completely dependent on political contacts. There are no real property rights, and that's a major problem of the Russian economy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think I can. We have only 3 minutes. Yes. Oh, okay. Sorry. Then we will steal some time from the next panel. It's okay.
Yes. I'm Sinikka Holma-Peets. I'm a concert pianist and a piano teacher and the chairman for the Children's and Women's Organization. And I just want to ask who is taking care of the rights of children in Russia? Because in Europe and community in Finland, we are shouting for the rights for homosexuals, but every country in European community has right down, even Finland, the international rights of children, the United Nations. And one article is telling that every child has a right for the mother and father. And I'm shouting for these little ones. There are so many children in Russia, and we know there are a lot of orphans. So what are the organizations, and who are shouting for those one who has no voice?
Who would like to answer? Yeah, Valery.
Нет, ну, конечно, есть правозащитные организации.
There are a lot of organizations like Organization about Children's Right of a Child. It's a very long-standing human rights organization. Maybe the network is insufficient that fight for the rights of children, but nevertheless, as far as the governmental organizations like Kostahov's organization, that's a shame on Russia.
Yes, I will try to make a very primitive conclusion of this discussion. I think you would all agree that the EU should not be afraid of the ES should not be afraid of conflict and should not be afraid to provoke Russia, but should keep on always demanding human rights and not thinking that we could gain anything by being more, by doing compromises on those issues. I have one last question just for you to comment before we break up. Yevlinsky mentioned that there are now millions of people in Russia, not only the hundreds of thousands that went out protesting, but also other people that really want to change Russia, and they need help and they need hope. What we need to see is that they keep their hope. And what do you think? What do you expect, not from the EES, but from the European citizens organizations, political parties, in order to give that kind of hope and support those organizations?
I believe that those strict statements showing that our government behaves shamelessly to its own citizens and to the human rights, it has quite a serious impact, because I can assure that any Russian person, especially the member of the government, does not consider himself non-European. I would like you not to behave treacherously towards the Helsinki Convention. And here in Helsinki, I would like to remind you, it was a huge privilege, a huge benefit, and let's continue to fight for those principles of human rights. Human right is not a national sovereignty. I have said it already, actually. If we take a stand of an ordinary citizen, we have to remind our governments, which these European governments are much maybe better than the Russian government, that human right is not a commodity.
Again? Yes. No. Two things from my perspective. First, to demonstrate that you can organize a political community, a country or the European Union based on values and not only on power. That's the idea of demonstration based on rules, not based on simply power structures. That's the first thing. And the second thing, open at as many opportunities for Russians to visit Europe, to make cultural contacts and everything else as possible.
Now there's coffee break. Thank you to our panel. We'll have a coffee break for half an hour, and we'll meet here again at 3 o'clock.